All right, let's dive into something that's been causing a stir, especially for those prepping for the UPSC, the Citizen Amendment Act, the CAA.
hmm
It's been in the news since 2019, but recent stuff makes it even more important, especially for future policymakers.
Absolutely, that's where I come in. Let's break it down to something you can use not just for the exam, but for understanding what's happening in India.
Okay, so the basics. What I as the CAA, I remember it being controversial, but a refresher never hurts.
Right. So the Citizen Amendment Act from 2019 is basically an update to India's Citizenship Act from way back in 1955. Its main goal is to make it easier for illegal migrants who came to India from three specific countries to become citizens: Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan.
Okay, straightforward enough, but there's a catch, right? Because I remember a lot of debate.
Here's where it gets interesting. The CAA only applies to illegal migrants from those three countries. IF, they're Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, or Christian. Leaving out Muslims is what started so much controversy.
Ah, that's what I was remembering. So people are saying that by bringing religion into it, the CAA goes against equality, right? Like what's in the Indian Constitution.
Exactly. They're saying it violates Article 14 of the Constitution, which guarantees the right to equality for everyone. It doesn't matter what their religion is. This is a big problem that has sparked legal challenges and protests all over.
So why this selective approach?
Yeah.
What do the people who support the CAA say?
Supporters of the CAA talk about the history. They point to how religious minorities in those countries are treated badly, often discriminated against, sometimes violence. And they say India has always offered refuge, and the CAA is just continuing that. This also goes back to the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, which was supposed to protect minorities in India and Pakistan after partition, but it failed.
So it's humanitarian.
Exactly. They argue it aims to give these minorities a good life with basic rights. They often talk about India's history of including and tolerating different faiths.
That makes sense. But if it's about helping persecuted groups, why not include other groups who are going through the same thing, like the Ahmadiyya community in Pakistan or the Rohingya Muslims from Myanmar?
That's a major criticism. Opponents point out that groups like the Ahmadiyas, Hazaras from Afghanistan, Rohingyas from Myanmar, and even Sri Lankan Tamils are left out. They say this makes it unfair and goes against what the Constitution says about equality.
And what about that December 31st, 2014 cutoff date? Why that date? What about people who had to flee after that?
That cutoff date is another problem. Critics say it's random and doesn't make sense. Why exclude people who had to flee even one day later? It makes you wonder what the real reasons for the act are.
Okay, so the CAA has definitely caused a lot of strong feelings.
Yeah.
And it sounds like people are still arguing about it. But let's move on to the recent changes. Can you tell us about the CAA rules that were finally announced in 2024? It seems like it took forever for them to come out.
Yes, it took over 4 years, but the Ministry of Home Affairs finally released the rules for how to use the CAA. These rules lay out the whole application process for people who want citizenship under the Act. And understanding these rules is really important, especially for those studying for the UPSC exam.
Okay, so break it down for me. What do you actually have to do to apply? What are the steps?
Well, refugees who are eligible have to submit an application, and this application needs to have an affidavit with it. In the affidavit, they confirm everything they said in the application. They also need character vouchers from a few Indian citizens, and they have to say that they know one of the official languages of India.
Wow, that's a lot of paperwork. So what happens after that?
Then they submit everything online to a committee at the district level. This committee checks all the documents and, importantly, makes them take the oath of allegiance.
What if someone can't physically be there for the process? Maybe because they're sick or something?
The rules can be flexible, but it's not a guarantee. If that happens, the committee can reject the application. But the district committee has to review it carefully first. It shows you have to be there in person for this.
Interesting. Okay, besides the application and affidavit, what other documents do you need to be eligible?
Applicants need a lot of documents. We're talking about their passport, birth certificate, anything that proves who they are. And to prove they should get citizenship, they need land records or something that shows their family came from Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Bangladesh.
Sounds pretty thorough.
Mm-hmm.
But how do they prove they came to India before December 31st, 2014? You know, that deadline we talked about.
To prove when they entered India, the rules list something like 20 different documents they can use. Think FRRO registration, census slips, government IDs like Aadhaar or ration cards, driving licenses, even marriage certificates from India. It's a pretty diverse list, probably to give people options since migration and documentation can be tricky.
So let's say someone does all of that. Do they just become a citizen?
If everything's good and the application is approved, they get a digital citizenship certificate. That makes it official that they're a citizen of India.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. Fleeing danger and then becoming a citizen, it's a huge change.
It is, and it goes back to the humanitarian side of the CAA. But it's important to remember that not everyone sees it that way. And the debate about the CAA isn't just about the process.
Exactly. We've talked about the legal stuff and the process,
Yeah.
but what about the bigger impacts of the CAA? Like socially and politically, what's happened?
Well, the CAA has definitely caused some big social and political changes.
For example, I remember those huge CAA protests. It felt like the whole country was talking about it.
You're right, the CAA caused protests everywhere, and a lot of them turned violent. This shows how much it divided people, with arguments often becoming about religion. It's made people worried about growing divisions in India, and for future policymakers like you, that's a really important thing to think about.
It's like the CAA brought out all these deeper worries and tensions that were already there in India.
Exactly. It's made people question what it means to be Indian, what secularism means, and what it means to belong here.
And how has the CAA affected India's image around the world?
It's definitely been criticized by international groups and a lot of democratic countries. They're worried that it goes against international rules about human rights and how to treat people without a country. There have also been reactions from countries like Bangladesh and Pakistan.
So the CAA has definitely made a big impact, both in India and globally. It's interesting how one law can cause so many different reactions and issues.
Absolutely. And it shows why it's important to understand the CAA from all sides, especially if you want to work in government. You'll have to deal with these complicated issues, balance different interests, and ultimately make decisions that will affect the whole country.
You've given us a lot to think about, but before we finish this part of our deep dive, I want to talk about something that's been on my mind. How does the CAA affect the Assam Accord?
Ah, yes. The Assam Accord is another important part of this, and how it connects to the CAA is something you definitely need to know for the UPSC exam.
For those who don't know, can you explain what the Assam Accord is about?
The Assam Accord was a big agreement signed in 1985. It was meant to find and deport illegal immigrants who came to Assam after March 25, 1971. It happened after years of protests and worries about how migration was affecting Assam's society and culture.
So how does the CAA fit in? What's the problem?
The problem is that the CAA, by giving citizenship to some immigrants no matter when they came, could clash with the Assam Accord. Remember, the accord was specifically about illegal immigration in Assam, with that specific cutoff date.
So people in Assam are worried that the CAA will take away the protections they fought for.
Exactly. They're afraid that giving citizenship to more immigrants, even if they fit the CAA's rules, could change the demographics of Assam, and they worry about losing their cultural and political influence. It's a sensitive issue that has caused a lot of anxiety and protests in Assam.
It sounds really complicated, with good points on both sides.
Absolutely. It's a perfect example of the kind of difficult situations policymakers face. Understanding the history, the legal details, and the human impact of policies like the CAA is crucial for making good decisions.
This is all incredibly helpful. I'm starting to see how everything fits together, but let's stop here for now.
Sounds good. We've covered a lot, but there's still more to talk about. And we're back, diving deeper into the Citizen Amendment Act. Remember, this isn't just a history lesson. It's about giving you the knowledge you need, especially if you're getting ready for that UPSC exam.
You're right. It's not just memorizing facts. It's about understanding this policy that has caused so much debate all over India. So picking up where we left off, what about the legal battles over the CAA? I know a lot of people went to the Supreme Court to challenge it.
You're right. A lot of petitions argue that the CAA violates that basic right to equality we talked about, Article 14 of the Constitution. Their main point is that using religion to decide who gets citizenship is discrimination, and it goes against the secular ideas in the Constitution.
So it all comes down to whether the CAA's religious criteria are okay according to the Constitution. It's a pretty big deal.
It is. The petitioners say this classification doesn't make sense and isn't fair. They say it doesn't connect to what the act is supposed to do. It's a classic constitutional debate that will probably have a big impact on Indian law.
So what's the government's argument? How are they defending the CAA?
The government says the CAA doesn't actually violate Article 14. They're using what's called the reasonable classification doctrine. This doctrine says it's okay to make some distinctions if they're based on, as they put it, intelligible differentia and have a rational nexus to the goal of the law.
Okay, what does that even mean?
Basically, they're saying it's okay to focus on specific religious groups because it serves a purpose. They talk about the historical context, the persecution these minorities faced, and the whole partition thing.
So they believe the CAA's selective